In May of 2026, the Portuguese government quietly rewrote the rules for what is, frankly, one of the most coveted passports on Earth.
Yeah, and with basically just the stroke of a pen, they instantly doubled the waiting time for thousands of people.
Which is wild. I mean, it triggered this massive wave of anxiety for pretty much anyone trying to secure European citizenship. So today, we're taking all these source materials. We've got newly minted legal updates, immigration guides, expert analyses, and we are tearing apart the new nationality law.
It's definitely needed because, honestly, the sheer volume of administrative fine print in this update is just staggering. You've got people completely panicking about timelines that don't even apply to them anymore.
Right.
And then on the flip side, you have people who are totally unaware that their clock just got reset by like 5 years.
Yeah, and that is exactly the core mission for this deep dive. We're going to figure out what the Portuguese parliament actually changed, what loopholes somehow survived the purge, and how you can actually navigate this vastly different landscape. But, before we get completely lost in the legislative weeds of 2026, I feel like we need to establish the baseline because, pursuing a second passport is basically an endurance sport.
Oh, 100%.
You really have to know what you're actually sweating for, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why are people so obsessed with this specific passport?
Well, the prize at the finish line definitely justifies the endurance. We are talking about this small burgundy booklet that effectively makes international borders evaporate.
Yeah.
It grants visa-free access to 189 countries. But beyond just, taking a vacation, it fundamentally alters a person's global mobility. And their security, really.
Right. I actually often hear it described in the sources as a generational gift, which makes a lot of sense when you realize Portuguese citizenship passes down by bloodline. So, if you acquire this passport, your kids are eligible, and then their kids.
Exactly. You are permanently expanding your family tree's options. They gain access to Portugal's National Health Service, the SNS, which is universal coverage. And they can attend public universities across Europe for literally a fraction of what it costs in places like the U.S. Plus, since Portugal allows dual citizenship, an American or an Australian doesn't even have to surrender their birth passport.
Right. You're stacking your options rather than, trading them in. But this is where the sources show a massive point of confusion. People frequently conflate permanent residency, what people just call PR, with actual citizenship.
Yeah, that happens constantly. Yeah. And the new 2026 laws treat these two statuses very, very differently.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Because if permanent residency legally allows me to go live by the beach in the Algarve, and I can use that public healthcare system and travel freely around Europe, citizenship kind of sounds like an expensive vanity project.
I get why people think that.
Right. Why go through the grueling process of naturalizing if PR already gives me the dream lifestyle?
Well, it's because permanent residency has these invisible walls. PR is a phenomenal status, don't get me wrong, but it ties your rights strictly to Portugal's borders. So, yes, you have the right to live and work indefinitely inside Portugal. And yes, you can travel the Schengen area, but you are still legally bound by the 91 80-day rule for the rest of Europe.
Wait, so if I have PR in Portugal, I can't just pack my bags tomorrow and, move to Paris or Berlin for a job offer?
No, you absolutely cannot. The moment you leave Portugal to go live elsewhere in Europe, you are essentially just a tourist again to the rest of the continent.
Oh, wow.
Citizenship is what shatters those walls. It gives you full freedom of movement across all 27 European Union states to live, work, and study with zero restrictions. Plus, you get voting rights in Portugal, so you actually have a voice in the society you joined.
And it's permanent, right?
Exactly. It's a permanent and irrevocable. PR can actually be lost if you leave the country for too long, but citizenship is yours for life.
Okay, that makes sense. And to clear up the inevitable financial question, because, anytime someone hears European citizenship, they immediately assume they're going to be taxed into oblivion. Does holding that passport suddenly hit you with a massive tax bill?
That is probably one of the most pervasive myths in global mobility right there.
Really?
Yeah. Your tax obligations are dictated by your physical residency, not your citizenship. So whether you hold a PR card or a full Portuguese passport, if you spend more than 183 days a year physically inside the country, you're a tax resident.
Ah, okay.
You don't pay additional taxes just for having that burgundy booklet sitting in your safe.
Good to know. So the distinction is super clear, and the ultimate value of the passport is undeniable. But that brings us to the actual 2026 legislative earthquake. because the bridge to get that passport just got significantly longer, and the government completely changed how they, measure the distance.
Yeah, the timeline is absolutely the headline of this May 2026 overhaul. So previously, the rule of thumb was 5 years. Most foreign nationals had maintained legal residency in Portugal for 5 consecutive years to qualify for naturalization.
Right, and now?
The revised nationality law simply erased that number and replaced it with 10.
10 years, just a full decade.
A full decade.
I mean, that fundamentally alters the life plans of thousands of people who moved over, assuming they were on a 5-year track. Are there any exceptions to this, or is literally everyone caught in this new net?
Well, there are a few specific carve-outs. Like if you are a citizen of a Portuguese-speaking country, the CPLP nations, which includes places like Brazil, Angola, Cape Verde, Mozambique, your timeline is now 7 years.
Okay, so a bit of a discount.
Yeah. I mean, it's still a jump from the old 3-year requirement for them, but it softened the blow. And that same 7-year timeline also applies if you are already a citizen of another EU nation.
The duration of the wait is shocking enough on its own, but honestly, reading through the sources, the actual mechanics of how this time is calculated seems to be causing the most chaos.
Yeah.
We need to look really closely at the clock.
Oh, the clock is a mess. And to understand it, you have to understand the bureaucratic bottlenecks in Portugal. So the immigration agency...
Wait, what does AIMA actually stand for again?
It stands for the Agency for Integration, Migration, and Asylum. They took over from the old border service a few years ago. And that transition, combined with just a massive influx of applicants, created this historic backlog.
Right, I've heard horror stories.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes a year or two from the moment you submit your application just to get your physical residency card printed and mailed to you.
But under the old system, the law that passed back in 2024, they accounted for that, right? The clock started ticking the moment you paid your fee and submitted your initial application.
It did. The 2024 law brilliantly protected applicants from AIMA's internal delays. So even if you waited 2 years just for your plastic card, those 2 years still counted toward your citizenship timeline.
Okay, but the 2026 rules
Completely reversed it for new applicants.
Oh.
Now, the clock only starts from the date your first residence card is physically issued to you.
I really want to make sure the sheer weight of that administrative detail lands for you. It's basically like waiting for a table at a brutally busy restaurant.
That's a good way to look at it.
Right. Under the old rules, your wait time officially began the second you gave your name to the host at the door. Under the new 2026 rules, your time doesn't start until you actually sit down at the table. All that time you spent standing in the lobby, which could be years of your life, it no longer counts toward your citizenship requirement.
That analogy perfectly captures the frustration people are feeling right now. What's fascinating here is how these technicalities can literally add years to the journey. However, there's a tiny glimmer of hope regarding when the law actually took effect.
Oh, tell me.
If you submitted your application and paid your submission fees before the new law was officially gazetted, which basically means formally published in the government registry, your clock still counts from that fee payment date.
Okay, so you're locked in.
Well, you are still subject to the new 10-year total wait time, but you're at least protected from having AIMA's processing delays added on top of it.
And for the people who are already right at the finish line, what if they submitted their actual final citizenship application before May 2026? And it's just, sitting on a desk waiting for approval.
They can breathe easy. The Portuguese Constitutional Court strictly prohibits applying laws retroactively in a way that harms the applicant. So if your citizenship application was already formally in the system before the new law took effect, you are completely grandfathered in under the old 5-year rules.
That's a massive relief for them. But knowing that the timeline has stretched to a decade for new applicants immediately forces us to look at the most famous pathway into Portugal, which is the Golden Visa.
Right, the famous Golden Visa.
Historically, this was the fast track for high net worth individuals. You invest some money, you spend barely a week a year in the country, and boom, 5 years later, you have an EU passport. If the finish line is now 10 years away, doesn't that fundamentally kill the value of the Golden Visa?
It creates a really fascinating paradox. On paper, doubling the timeline looks like a fatal blow to investor migration. But you have to actually separate the citizenship law from the visa itself.
Okay.
Because the Golden Visa framework is completely unchanged by the 2026 update.
Let's define the current boundaries of that framework really quick, because it has evolved a lot. You can no longer buy residential real estate to qualify, right? I know that ended back in October 2023.
Correct. But the other financial routes are still wide open. The most popular route today is investing €500,000 into a highly regulated Portuguese investment fund.
Got it.
And there's a stipulation that 60% of that fund's capital has to remain invested in domestic companies. Or, alternatively, you can make a $250,000 non-refundable donation to cultural heritage or the arts.
Okay, and the physical presence requirement, because that was always the biggest draw.
It remains completely intact. You are still only required to spend an average of 7 days a year inside Portugal.
See, that is the sticking point for me. If someone is locking up €500,000 in a venture capital fund and the citizenship goalpost just moved from 5 years to 10 years, the risk profile entirely changes. Who wants to keep that much capital illiquid and tied to a single country's economy for a full decade just to get a passport?
Well, that's the secret. They don't have to.
Yeah.
And this is the mechanical workaround that keeps the golden visa highly relevant today.
Explain that.
Remember how we discussed the difference between permanent residency and citizenship earlier?
Yeah.
The path to citizenship now takes 10 years, but the path to permanent residency remains frozen at 5 years.
Wait, so how does an investor utilize that difference? Walk me through the actual timeline there.
Okay, think of it as a two-stage rocket. Stage 1 is the investment. You place your $500,000 into the fund today. Over the next 5 years, you fulfill your minimal requirement of spending 7 days a year in Portugal.
Easy enough.
Right. And when year 5 hits, you have fulfilled the legal requirement to apply for permanent residency. Once AVIMEG grants you that PR card, you now have the independent, permanent right to live and work in Portugal.
Oh.
At that exact moment, your residency is no longer dependent on your investment at all.
Meaning you can just liquidate the fund, you pull your $500,000 out, take whatever returns you made, and you still get to hold your PR status.
Exactly. You just drop the booster rocket from year 5 to year 10. You simply hold on to your PR card, wait out the rest of the clock, and then apply for citizenship.
Okay, that is a massive strategic distinction. So the golden visa hasn't been killed, it's just been demoted, kind of. It shifted from being this direct citizenship purchase to a highly effective residency tool.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Because when you break down the actual sunk costs, say a family of 4 going the fund route might spend around €50,000 in government application and renewal fees over those 5 years, plus legal counsel. For a family looking for a Plan B escape hatch to Europe without having to uproot their kids' schooling or sell their primary business, that is still incredibly viable.
It absolutely is. It just shifts the mindset from transactional to structural. But of course, for those who don't just have €500,000 lying around or who simply refuse to wait 10 years under any circumstances, there are still bypass lanes.
The shortcuts.
Exactly. If you have the right familial ties, you can completely circumvent the residency requirements.
Let's explore those bypass lanes, starting with probably the most common one, marriage. How does the 2026 law treat spouses?
Well, if you are married to a Portuguese citizen, or you're in a judicially recognized de facto union, which is basically the equivalent of unmarried documented cohabitation, you can apply for citizenship after just 3 years.
3 years. That is a sprint compared to a 10-year marathon. And the residency requirement for this route is 0, correct? Like, you can be living in Toronto or Sydney or Chicago, marry a Portuguese citizen, wait 3 years, and submit your application to the consulate without ever having set foot in Lisbon.
In theory, yes.
In theory. Okay, what's the catch?
The 2026 law tightened the filter significantly to catch fraudulent or so-called paper marriages. The government now mandates that you must prove an effective connection to the Portuguese community.
See, that sounds highly subjective. How does an applicant living in Chicago practically prove an effective connection to a country they don't even live in? Do they have to, like, show grocery receipts from a local Portuguese market?
It's actually not that bad. The law provides a series of automatic legal presumptions to make this easier. So, for example, if you have been married for 6 or more years, the government automatically presumes you have a connection, and you literally don't need to submit further proof.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and that same presumption applies if you've been married for 5 years and can pass a language test, or if you and your Portuguese spouse share a child who already holds Portuguese nationality.
But if you don't neatly fit into those specific buckets, say you've only been married for 3 years and you don't have kids yet, you basically have to manually build a case file.
Yes. You are essentially gathering evidence. You might join a recognized Portuguese cultural association in your home country, or buy property in Portugal, take language courses, log frequent visits. You just have to convince the authorities that your integration is genuine.
Right.
And beyond proving your own integration, there's another hurdle. The specific origin of your spouse's citizenship dictates your entire timeline. This is a nuance that derails so many applications.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this is one of those mechanisms that requires a visual. It's essentially like a software update for your spouse.
I like that.
If your spouse is Portuguese by origin, meaning they were born with a citizenship or they acquired it through descent from a parent or grandparent, the government basically views them as having been born with the Portuguese operating system. Because their citizenship is retroactive to birth, you get credit for the entire duration of your marriage.
That's a great way to conceptualize it. The contrast to that is citizenship by acquisition. If your spouse naturalized by living in Portugal for a decade, or they acquired it through previous marriage, they essentially downloaded the Portuguese operating system much later in life.
Which means if they downloaded it later, you only get credit for your marriage starting from the day their download finished.
Correct.
So if you were married for 5 years before your spouse finally received their naturalization certificate, those first 5 years legally do not exist for your own application. Your 3-year clock only starts ticking the day they officially became Portuguese.
It is a brutal technicality, but it's absolutely essential to understand if you're taking that route. The other major bypass lane, of course, is descent. If you have at least one Portuguese parent who is properly registered in the civil registry, or a grandparent who retained their citizenship, you can apply directly. That process currently takes about 2 years, and crucially, once you're approved, you are considered Portuguese from the exact moment of your birth.
That distinction of being Portuguese from birth is incredibly powerful. But we do need to put a bit of a warning label on these bypass lanes, especially for blended families. Marriage and descent are strictly individual pathways. They do not automatically blanket your entire family in citizenship.
They absolutely do not. And this catches people off guard. If you acquire a passport through marriage to a Portuguese citizen, your non-Portuguese children from a previous relationship do not magically inherit that status.
So they're just left out.
An adult child from a previous marriage has to find their own distinct legal route, whether that's securing a work visa and starting their own 10-year residency clock, or finding another pathway. Every single family member has to be mapped independently.
So whether you grind out the 10-year residency route, or you utilize the Golden Visa 2-stage rocket, or you take the 3-year marriage shortcut, every single applicant eventually arrives at the exact same final checkpoint. There are these universal toll booths of integration that everyone has to pass.
And the most notorious of these toll booths is, without a doubt, the language requirement. To become a citizen, you must prove A2 level proficiency in Portuguese.
Let's break down exactly what A2 means, because it sounds intimidating to a lot of people. Are we talking about like debating philosophy, or is this just ordering a coffee?
No philosophy. A2 is classified as elementary on the European framework. It's just basic functional communication. You need to be able to navigate everyday scenarios.
Like what?
Introducing yourself, asking for directions, reading public transport schedules, writing civil correspondence, stuff like that. To prove this, you can take the official CIPOL exam, which stands for the Initial Certificate of Portuguese as a Foreign Language.
And how hard is the actual test?
Well, it costs about €72. It covers oral, reading, writing, and expression, and you only need a 55% score to pass.
Okay, that doesn't sound too bad. But what if you are just terrible at standardized testing? Are there other options?
You do have an alternative. You can enroll in a state-recognized PLA course. That's Portuguese as a host language. If you complete the required 150 hours of instruction, the course certificate itself serves as your proof of proficiency, so you bypass the standalone exam entirely.
Now, I want to address our listeners from Brazil for a second, because there is a massive trap here. It's really easy to assume that because you're a native Portuguese speaker, you just breeze through this requirement. But the test is strictly graded on European Portuguese, isn't it?
Yes, and the linguistic mechanics are entirely different, and the examiners are very unforgiving. European Portuguese is often described as stress-timed, so speakers kind of swallow their vowels and compress sounds, whereas Brazilian Portuguese is syllable-timed, with wide open vowels.
So they sound completely different.
Very different. And then there's the grammar. Brazilians heavily use the gerundio, saying, I am speaking, while the European standard heavily relies on the infinitive structure to say the exact same thing.
Wow.
Yeah, if a Brazilian applicant doesn't study the specific European grammatical structures and the phonetic nuances, they can literally fail a test in their own native tongue.
That is a fascinating hurdle. But language is just the beginning of these toll booths, right? The 2026 overhaul heavily fortified the final security checks as well.
They did. They basically modernized the entire security apparatus. First, the 2026 laws introduced a mandatory civic and historical knowledge test, alongside a formal, signed declaration adhering to the principles of a democratic state.
Right.
Furthermore, you must provide biometric data, so facial mapping and fingerprints, which is cross-referenced with international databases. They also require robust proof of subsistence to ensure you won't immediately become a financial burden on the state.
And what about the criminal background checks? Have those changed?
They are far more stringent now. If you have a criminal conviction carrying a potential sentence of 3 or more years, or if you are subject to any United Nations or European Union sanctions, your citizenship application will be blocked entirely. There's zero flexibility there.
But wait, even if you clear the language test, pass the civic exams, and have a totally spotless criminal record, the government still reserves a final veto. How does that actually work in practice?
It comes down to the Ministerio Público, which is the public prosecutor's office. Once your application is fully registered, the prosecutor has a legally mandated 2-year window to formally oppose it.
2 years? Just to review it?
Yeah, and this isn't just a rubber stamp. They actively investigate. They look for tax discrepancies, evidence of fraudulent marriages, or a lack of genuine physical ties to the community. If they find a red flag, they file an injunction in the administrative court to halt your naturalization.
So they aren't just looking for reasons to say yes, they are actively hunting for reasons to say no.
Exactly. It just underscores how seriously the state takes the final granting of nationality.
So when we step back and survey this entire board, the reality is pretty clear. Portugal's passport remains an absolute powerhouse. It's a generational asset that fundamentally changes a family's trajectory. But the 2026 nationality law has fundamentally redrawn the map to get there.
Without doubt.
The residency route now demands a 7 to 10-year commitment. The golden visa is really best utilized as a tactical stepping stone to permanent residency. And the bypass routes, like marriage, demand rigorous, documented proof that you are actually weaving yourself into the fabric of the country.
The bar has unequivocally been raised. You can no longer just run out the clock in the shadows. You have to actively participate and integrate.
Which really brings us to the core realization of this deep dive. The era of treating a second passport like a simple financial transaction is closing.
It is a profound shift in global immigration. And I want you, the listener, to think about the broader implications of these 2026 changes. With the introduction of civic tests, democratic declarations, rigorous language standards, and decade-long timelines, we are watching a nation redefine what it actually means to belong.
It's powerful stuff.
It is. Ask yourself, as countries push back against commodified citizenship, are we entering an era where securing a second passport demands not just your capital and your patience, but a genuine piece of your cultural identity?
It's a fascinating evolution. Earning a place in the community has officially replaced just buying a passport. We really hope this deep dive helped you navigate the complex new reality of the 2026 nationality law. Keep analyzing the changes, keep exploring your options, and hey, if you are embarking on this decade-long journey, start practicing those European Portuguese flashcards today. The world is still waiting to be unlocked, but you now have to prove you truly belong before they hand you the key.